in Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh had his strategy was just, impeccable. And, right now it sounds like the Iranians' strategy, seems to be really sharp. I mean, obviously their head leader was killed and then his son was replaced in. And so they had a strategy for succession. And then now they are attacking, to my understanding, they're attacking the nearby neighboring nations and really impacting these infrastructure. So it seems like it's getting to the point where the neighboring nations are really thinking about the implications for them. And so there was a recent article that said the Gulf Cooperation Council are all assessing future and current investments and sponsorships if this war lasts long. And so we've had Saudi Arabia come in, and I guess they pledged $1 trillion or something like that. I think Trump said trillions of dollars. And so, I'm curious in your perspective there on if this goes longer, what implications are there for them, and how does this impact our relations with Saudi Arabia and this whole petrodollar system?
Well, there are two things to keep in mind. When there is no strategy in war, there is no end to the war. We never had a strategy. I think the problem in Washington was that, first of all, it's a combination of ignorance and arrogance. We did not have a high opinion of Iran and its military capabilities. We didn't understand Iran. Iran is Persia. It's been around for 2,700 years. This is a large civilizational state. And this state is not going to roll over for Israel or us. And remember that all the demands that President Trump has set forth are Israeli demands. All we have been doing is acting as Israel's enforcer. And Israel's demands were never realistic. Because effectively, you give up not just your uranium enrichment, you're going to surrender your ballistic missile arsenal. You're going to stop cooperating with your friends in the Gulf, whoever they are, and you're going to basically worship at the altar of Israel. You're going to do what we tell you. You're going to accept our military and political hegemony over the region. Well, Darrell, that's not going to happen. That's an impossibility. And we stupidly signed on for these outrageous demands. Now we're trying to figure out how do we back down from these demands and get out of the Gulf. That's very difficult because we've now got an adversary that says, well, you may be finished. We're not finished. And we're going to keep going. So, the picture is very dire because as far as the oil is concerned and the natural gas that we extract from the ground in that region, effectively it's offline. It's not just stopped. In other words, you're not talking about wells that are pumping, refineries that are refining, storage tanks that are being emptied. No, it's over for the moment. In other words, I would say for at least 6 months to a year, most of the oil in the region is offline. It's as though, in your house, you have a circuit breaker and, the current goes out, you go out to the circuit breaker, you hit the switch and they go up. Well, they want to hit the switch and turn on the oil. It's not happening. It's not going to happen. There's talk right now, we have to get back at these Iranians. We'll destroy Karg Island. That's the big oil terminal for the Iranians in the Persian Gulf. And they've made it very clear, if you destroy Karg Island, which is our oil terminal from their oil fields, then we will destroy all of the oil infrastructure in the Persian Gulf. And we've said, oh no, they'll never do that. Wrong. They will do it. Just look at what they've done already, and there's not a damn thing we can do to prevent it. So now we have the rest of the world breathing down our necks saying, if you don't stop this very soon, we're going into a global reset that is economically catastrophic, not just for us, but for the whole world. So I don't think the GCC has much flexibility. And remember, first, it was the British for over 100 years that promised and delivered on protection for these little oil kingdoms, including Saudi Arabia. We agreed privately in the 1930s to protect the Saudi oil resources. Now, what we found out is that we can't do that. We can't shoot down the missiles. We can't bring the Iranians, so to say, to heel. We couldn't even defeat the Houthis. Does anybody remember the Houthis? I mean, this tribe of backward Arabs living in the mountains in southern Yemen that everybody dismissed out of hand as incapable. They shut down the Red Sea. They shut down commerce to the Suez Canal. Why did we think if we could not stop that and defeat those people, how could we possibly take on a nation of 93 million people the size of Western Europe? And these people are very proud. They're proud of their origins, their culture, their identity, their history. We spit on it. That's the problem. And they're not going to do business with us, certainly not on our terms. So I think we're going to have to find someone somewhere who can mediate for us. But I think the terms that we will have to agree to, Darrell, are going to be very humiliating for the United States. Now, there is an alternative I didn't discuss, and that is that Mr. Netanyahu, who is the real cause of all this trouble in Israel, could turn to a nuclear weapon because the Israelis have nuclear weapons. And if they used a nuclear weapon against Iran, I think the world changes profoundly.
Yeah.
And I don't even want to consider the possibilities of what could happen after that, but they could include a nuclear catastrophe for Israel, because there are many people in the world who will not tolerate this. And I'm not sure that President Trump has Mr. Netanyahu under his authority. It looks an awful lot to me like Mr. Netanyahu is in charge of President Trump.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something that, we hope and pray does not lead to that. So curious on regime change. So this has been a constant narrative, and there's a narrative that we're trying to change the regime. We had this in Venezuela, then you go, throughout history. We had, I think there was a meme going around. We spent trillions of dollars for regimes change in Afghanistan, only for the Taliban to be back in charge of Afghanistan. This regime change narrative, what happens with this? So. Are we just being fed bullshit pretty much?
Well, I think that's a 99% probability. Absolutely. First of all, let's keep something in mind. We did not change the regime in Venezuela. What we did is we paid off people millions of dollars to let us come in and kidnap Mr. Maduro and his wife and bring them back to the United States, ostensibly for trial and incarceration. What about Venezuela? Venezuela is unchanged. The same government is there. All the people that commanded the police, the armed forces, everyone who runs the economy or has his hands in it, they're all there. Nothing has changed. So what did we do? Well, we basically said we're going to steal the oil. Every time you fill another tanker with oil, we're going to take it and we'll decide what to do with it. That's not a regime change. The last time I looked, that's called piracy. So there's been no regime change in Venezuela. And of course, if you were really interested in dealing with the drug problem and the drug cartels and the fentanyl and everything else that people rightly complain about, you would have looked at Mexico, not Venezuela. Venezuela's role in all that is minuscule. And most of our problems emanate from Mexico. But, that's water under the bridge. So we've really changed nothing. So now we're talking about a place called Iran and changing the regime there. And that never had much chance of occurring. And I think we have to go back to the Kosovo air campaign back in 1999, because that campaign was launched with the purpose of removing a man named Milosevic from the presidency of Yugoslavia, or what was really at that point Serbia Plus. And we bombed for 78 days, and ultimately the bombing did not change anything. What the bombing did is it compelled us, when it did not cause the Serbs to relent and surrender, it caused us to send the Deputy Secretary of State, Talbot, to go to Moscow and negotiate a deal with the Russians about which we know very little in terms of details, and persuade the Russians that in return for what we promised to do for them, they would pull the plug on Milosevic. Now, what does pull the plug mean? Milosevic began the air campaign against us, or we began it against him, and he was promised by the Russians that they would provide food, medicine, and fuel to get through the winter. Remember, all of this started in February, and the Serbs said, well, we think we can hold out through the summer into the fall, but we'll need help to get through the winter. Well, the Russians agreed to whatever terms that we had offered them, whatever bonuses, and they backed out. And they told Milosevic, we can't promise you anything for the future in terms of food, fuel, and medicine, so you'll have to make the best deal you can with the Americans. In response to that, after 78 days of bombing, the Serbian military establishment pulled out of Kosovo. The reason I bring that up is because we fought that air campaign, or we conducted it, because we wanted to get rid of Milosevic. 6 months plus after the air campaign, Milosevic was removed by his own people. And I would go back to Iran, and I would make the argument that had we stayed out of Iran's internal affairs and let events run their course in Iran, we would have seen a new government in that country much sooner. But now, having attacked it, everyone in the country, whether they like the regime in Tehran or not, is a nationalist. They are all determined to defend their country. They are determined to defeat us. In other words, we forced cohesion on Iran and Iranian society. But I would bet that probably by Christmas next year, or maybe the spring of next year, we will see change in Iran that we will probably welcome purely from the standpoint of what makes sense socially, culturally, politically. But we're not going to have a friendly regime there, not for a very, very long time. And that's tragic, because Iran has more reasons and we have more reasons to cooperate with them and they with us than we have to fight with each other strategically. So this entire construct, this war, is all a function of Israel and the enormous amounts of money that wealthy Zionist billionaires in the United States have poured into President Trump and Congress for many years, by the way, to ensure that whatever they wanted to happen, which they deemed to be in Israel's interest, would happen. And I don't know if you saw it, and I wouldn't want you to have to go back and listen to it because it was terrible, but President Trump's State of the Union speech, at one point, he finally mentioned Iran, and he said, Iran must never have a nuclear weapon, and while I am president, I am committed that I will stop that no matter what. For the first time, he got a standing ovation from everybody in the Congress, including all the people opposed to him. Well, why? Because all of those people have been benefiting from the largesse of these billionaires working for Israel. In other words, our Congress was purchased along with the White House. So this makes it all that more difficult for President Trump, who I understand is genuinely looking for an exit, a so-called off-ramp, and would like to put this war behind him. How can he do that? How can he disengage, especially since Israel is in very bad condition? And one wonders whether or not, if we did engage, whether they would survive.